Ranjini George, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your presence.
Yeah, it's so good to be here, Simon, and a beautiful way, please call me Ranjini, a beautiful way to begin. Kai was in my Stoicism and Good Life class last night, and it was late at night for him. So I think he got done at 11:30 p.m. So he has an UK time because my time here was 6:30 in Toronto. So he did a wonderful visit. And
well, I'm glad that you guys have had a chance to spend some time with each other there, and hopefully, yeah, I think he'll either be here very soon or he'll be here upon the hour for the Q&A section nonetheless. So and excellent, Judith, it's great to see that you've got some tea or some coffee there. I know it's early for you as well. So welcome everybody. This is such a pleasure today to have Dr. Ranjini George here with us, and I guess we're going to be starting off with a bit of a discussion around obviously the topic of today's whole talk on what we can learn from a Zen monk and a Roman emperor. And so that's going to be the theme, I guess, of our discussion. For those of you who are here for the first time within the Walled Garden meetup series that we're doing here, I'll just quickly let you know that my name is Simon Drew. I'm one of the co-founders of the Walled Garden. And what we are doing here is we're putting together a community of independent philosophers and fellow seekers who are interested in exploring well, I guess the tagline on the website is seeking truth, wisdom, virtue, and the divine. You know, and so I'm going to go with that. That's what we're doing with all of these meetups, is we're bringing people into our little garden here and saying, what can you teach us about truth, wisdom, virtue, and the divine? And certainly, Dr. Ranjini George, do you mind if I call you Ranjini for the purposes of the interview? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Beautiful.
Please call me Ranjini.
Well, I will do that. And as I said, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And I guess the first question that I just want to throw out to you is, could you please just tell everybody here in our meetup a little bit more about yourself, your background, and perhaps please dive into a conversation about your depth of philosophical experience, I guess, in all the different ranges of paths to enlightenment, you might say. So I'll throw that over to you.
Okay, good question, Simon. And thank you for being here. Hi, Christine. Christine is in Toronto too from my class. And so I was born in Calcutta, India, lived in Kenya, studied in the US, taught in Dubai and Oman, and immigrated to Canada more than 10 years ago. And so my field really is literature, and faith was something that was really important to me from the time I was young, really young, whether it was through dreams, through interest, but really faith and writing. And so when I was really young, around maybe 10 years old, this Indian girl in Bangalore, I began keeping a diary and addressed it to Anne Frank, who I have here, because through the power of words, like she was my sort of best friend, and I sort of emptied my heart out to her. And then I went on to study literature, and I've always been interested in philosophy. Philosophy at that time through the lens of literature, so existentialist philosophers and others, and I was interested in dualism. Things like, for my PhD thesis, I worked on William Golding, and he and what he brought in, John Steinbeck with East of Eden and others. I grew up in a country where Hinduism is really present, and had it gradually developed a deep interest in studying, especially the feminine face of Hinduism. Figures like the fierce feminine, Kali, who I sort of feared, but sort of drew on in my contemplations as I tried to develop that aspect myself, of how do you take fierce action for yourself, how do you uphold yourself, even, and not slip into idiot compassion, because there is that other side of compassion. I'm interested in Sufism. I studied Hinduism with different teachers. So just this, and then Buddhism. I also teach I'm a visiting teacher at the Tara Mandala Buddhist Retreat Center, and stumbled onto Stoicism. And that's a long story, but I'll keep it really brief. I got a gift of a Roman bust while I lived in Dubai, and didn't know his name. Later on found out that he was the father of, the adoptive father of Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus Pius. And more recently came across Donald Robertson's book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. And when I read the book, I was struck by the similarities between Buddhism and Stoicism. As I went through his book, I thought, my goodness, this is exactly what Thich Nhat Hanh says, or what the Dalai Lama says. So that really is my journey to how I even came to Stoicism.
Yeah, I love that, and this is what I mean when I say that depth and also that breadth of experience with various forms of enlightenment or various paths towards a deeper experience in life. You've been around the Buddhism or the Hinduism and the Stoicism and all of the isms that are guiding us towards this path of, as I said, this deeper experience. And I guess what for you do you think were some of the major components of both the Zen tradition and the Stoicism tradition that you found so interlinked?
Mm-hmm. So, I'll backtrack for a second. That for a long period in my life, when things went wrong, I would just pray, and I would wait for something external to happen. It seems unbelievable now, but it didn't strike me even in my 30s that there was much that I could do with my mind to deal with that situation. And so when I came to Buddhism and I started, it's really a psychology, and how do you train your mind? How do you, cognitive reframing, present moment awareness, how do you live in a state where you don't feel that happiness is around the corner, but really happiness is here and now? How do you move from the state where you're constantly never in the present moment, but worrying about the future and, either sad or mourning some happiness of the past? So it was these kind of things of just learning that this mind, which they say in Buddhism, if you look at the deities, they are holding a jewel. And the jewel is the jewel of the wish-fulfilling mind, which is the awakened mind. So this idea that the mind could actually be trained through daily practice, and that the very things that I resisted and wished hadn't happened, the very suffering that I, would sort of take away all my happiness, was really the very thing that could be compost, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, that from which fruits and vegetables can grow. I remember once walking on the beach in Dubai and, and thinking, my goodness, so much mud, so much suffering. And the thought that came to me was bigger lotus. Thich Nhat Hanh says, no mud, no lotus. A lotus can't grow on marble, it really grows on the mud of our suffering. So this idea that actually within myself, I had this stoic nature, this Marcus Aurelius nature, this Buddha nature, that I actually had this potential, and that through daily practice. And I think that was really important to me. When Seneca says each day is a life, And when Thich Nhat Hanh says, every morning when you wake up, say 24 hours before me, that it's really a precious human life. That daily practice and that acknowledgement that each day of my life was a life, was really huge. And then there's so many similarities, like it could go on forever. The concept of impermanence, the concept of praise and blame, that it's just, praise is just empty sound. The ability, even in the way I do my work, as Marcus Aurelius says, that if we could do our work without being attached to secondary considerations of, will this work be successful? Will this book be published? But actually just do our work with the things we can control. So really accessing these philosophies, Buddhism has often been called a philosophy. Actually accessing it allowed me to access joy. And both Buddhism and Stoicism have this huge emphasis on self-examination. It's huge. I mean, every single day, Pythagoras' golden verses, ask yourself, what did I do? How did I, what could I have done better? What did I leave out? This constant self-examination that you do with maitri, that you do with loving kindness, not with judgment, not with, not to feel terrible about yourself, but to do it, to cradle it. As Thich Nhat Hanh would say, you cradle that jealousy like a mother cradles a child. You cradle that depression like a mother cradles a child. And you bring to it not just the practice, but the energy of mindfulness. And so there was just, I find so much, even prasoke, stoic mindfulness, stoic journaling. There's so many areas. And it's a way of living fully. When I look back, before I sort of woke up to what I could do with this mind, I would spend not just days, but weeks in complaint, weeks in blaming others, weeks in wishing life was not what it was. So it really, it turns everything around. It's life-changing. You learn to water, you learn to look at your own neurosis, your own habitual patterns. As Thich Nhat Hanh would say, you learn to water the seeds of joy in yourself, and you learn to cut off the nutrients from the things that bring you and others suffering. So really the spotlight, instead of saying so-and-so hurt me and so-and-so said this and so-and-so wronged me or betrayed me, really turning that back to, what the Stoics tell us, not the externals that you can't control, set it aside and look at what you can control, which is your own character, your mind, your courage, your temperance, and so forth. So I find that both these philosophies have just been, incredibly life-changing and nourishing for me.
And this is something that we so often hear is, especially just doing the podcast over the past few years, is you do hear people say, talk about Buddhism or, talk about Taoism and look at all these different traditions that I've found, that so very much align with the sort of stuff that we're saying here. And I love the imagery that you're giving us. You mentioned that it is the compost, of the mind that we're growing these beautiful seeds in. Seneca even discusses this idea that there are these divine seeds scattered within our souls, within our minds, right? And we nourish them. And even at the walled garden, I mean, the imagery is, or kind of one of our taglines is, nurturing the gardens of our minds, one meaningful conversation at a time. So we're here to plant those seeds and then to water them and to see what comes of that when we decide to intentionally seek after wisdom and truth and virtue and the divine. And one of the ways that we obviously do that, and you mentioned this, is through daily practice. And I wonder, Could you maybe talk a little bit more about some of the daily practices from various traditions that you've explored that you think are most helpful? I know you've mentioned a few, but I think it's really important that we set this question aside and say, what can people do every day if they want to nourish those seeds in their mind?
Mm-hmm. So, so in terms of the way I begin my day, they say in Buddhism that if you don't, and in Stoicism too, if you don't remind yourself of what your core values are, whatever the day comes, you won't ride the day will ride you. So one of the first things I do is really that recollection of my aspirations. So in Buddhism, a key aspiration in Mahayana Buddhism is bodhicitta, which is the aspiration for all sentient beings. This idea, may all beings be happy, may they be free of suffering and the roots of suffering. And so this reminder of this aspiration sort of helps me to sort of mitigate, to work with this egoic preoccupation with self, me. And then just this reminder of, I'm sometimes working on different things, different challenges. So sometimes it could be, a reminder to have more patience, a reminder not to speak when I'm angry, but to wait. So, with whatever deep listening. So at different periods, sometimes I'm working on a particular quality, and I bring that to mind first thing in the morning. I do rituals. I actually do offer incense and water offering. I don't think the rituals by themselves need to be done or not done, but for me, it's a reminder. And so by actually doing it, it reminds me. I'm huge in journal. I journal. I journal in the morning, first thing. I teach a class called Dear Diary, which is Marcus Aurelius, Anne Frank, and Thich Nhat Hanh. And Anne Frank, she begins her diary by saying, "Dear Kitty, Dear Kitty, I can tell you everything which I haven't told anyone else." So I think of paper as this bodhisattva. In Buddhism, we say this awakened being that actually is compassionate. Paper sort of holds your griefs and so journaling for me is a spiritual practice. So my day really does begin with, with the meditation sitting, but also with the practice of journaling. And then through the day, I try to do check-ins, breath breaks. I try to slow down. And at the end of the day, there is some kind of looking through the day, scanning the day, and sort of seeing what I could have done better and, all that. Touching on your question, Simon, about different traditions, because I've studied with Hindu teachers from the Vedic tradition, and even in Buddhism, we have the use of mantras. Thich Nhat Hanh has very simple mantras, things like happiness is here and now, nowhere to go, nothing to do. When you find yourself too speedy, flow as a river when you're stuck. Yesterday, Kai in class said, fate is not something that happens to you, but it's something that happens through you. So dropping our resistance to where some of the things that destiny or life has brought us, but letting it flow through us. So he has simple mantras like flow as a river, present moment, wonderful moment. And then in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and in the Hindu tradition, you have mantras that are associated with the sacred feminine, like the female Buddha, Om Tare, Tu Tare, Tu Re Soha. The repetition of the mantra, like the rosary, when you use it with the 108 beads, is a way to still your mind. And that's a practice that I also do. So, different things.
Well, I want to ask something there, because what I'm seeing as a theme is ritually coming back to attention. And I mean, I want to ask something about this because I was recently talking with a client, and we this is something that so often comes up, which is that sometimes you can just be in your day and then all of a sudden you just wake up and you're just somewhere doing something that perhaps you didn't think about, perhaps you didn't intentionally go there, but you're just there. It's like you just wake up and, oh, I'm in front of the fridge right now getting a snack, or oh, I'm just looking at my phone on Facebook and scrolling through. Hopefully, you don't wake up and be like, oh, I've just slapped a person or something like that. But sometimes it happens. you just wake up, and I often try to think, okay, well, what is the best approach to helping people to be? Because it seems like our goal with these meditative practices would be to be awake more of the time, to actually be here intentionally awake and ready to respond to the callings, the promptings of this particular moment. And what I'm hearing in your answers there is that we need these kind of rituals throughout our day to remind us to stay awake, right? And you mentioned that you use in your rituals, maybe some incense or certain things. I think that is completely reasonable to add something as a stimulus or something. To a lot of people, it will seem kind of religious or a little bit airy-fairy or woo-woo and stuff. I don't think so. And I wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit more about your experience with rituals, and because we see these in every religious tradition and perhaps less philosophical traditions, but nonetheless in Stoicism, we do have rituals. Could you just talk to the importance of rituals as a way of bringing our attention back and wakefulness, I guess?
Mm-hmm. So I think the rituals are just a way of bringing our attention, so now at my writing desk, this is a coaster that I got from Key West. I don't know if you can see it, but this is Ernest Hemingway's, his writing room. I have a Flannery O'Connor or something here. So it's a way of having that space call you. It's a reminder. It's a reminder, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, there is no country but the country of the present moment. And Marcus Aurelius, sort of says the same thing in different ways. He says each of us lives only in the present. So there is that, but yet we are often not in the present. Yet we don't live, we're not fully embodied. We don't really, when we listen, we don't really listen. We don't listen to ourselves. We don't listen to others fully. We don't listen to the world around us. So the whole practice really of mindfulness, and in the Zen tradition, there are fewer rituals, like say than the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. But I think it's your preference, whichever way, what works for you. And for me, objects, having Flannery O'Connor's a magnet with a house is a reminder of my aspiration to write and her love for writing. So I think that's what rituals do. And for me, when I engage in that, it's a way of reminding myself that slow down, feel your feet on the earth, feel your breath, acknowledge that this is another day and you are still alive, and being alive is a gift. Thich Nhat Hanh would go on to say that the one, and quoting from the Heart Sutra, which is the key text of Mahayana Buddhism, that the one who bows and the one who is bowed to is empty. So we are not really putting God in a particular place, but we are really, it's a way of just sort of centering yourself and connecting yourself to those aspirations. So I find rituals useful. I mean, that said, it might as the Dalai Lama says, not everybody you don't have to be Chinese to eat Chinese food. Not everybody has the same taste. It works for me. But I think the rituals, even, when you're repeating the mantra of, say, the female Buddha, Tara, Tare, Tu Tare, Soha, and you're repeating it 108 times, you're learning a certain discipline. You're learning to stay instead of this constant, what Thich Nhat Hanh calls the hurry sickness. We are always running. He says we never stop. He says the miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on earth with mindfulness. So this, whatever it is, whatever your ritual is, for some writers, it's sharpening their pencils and getting their cup of coffee. Whatever your ritual is, whatever it is that helps you enter that space. And, as Seneca reminds us, it's not lack of time, it's how we use time. And then our time is our life. So what are we running after? It's that reminder to slow down. So when we wash dishes and we find we're thinking of our project, Thich Nhat Hanh would say that if you do that in a hurry and you're thinking of your project, you've lost your life at that particular point of time. So the goal is really meditation, not just on the cushion, but meditation in action. Your whole life becomes, that's the goal, a meditation, right?
I wonder if have you spent much time with Seneca's work yet in your study of Stoicism, or are you mostly around Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus?
I have read a little bit of Seneca, but especially like his essay on anger. But I have to say that I focus mostly on Marcus Aurelius. I think as a writer, because it's a journal, it really resonated with me. But yeah, there's so much I've learned from Seneca and so much from Epictetus. But
well, I'm gonna have to put the call out there. Oh, sorry about the echo there, because Seneca, there's actually a lot of scholars who believe that he wasn't actually writing his letters to a specific person, but he was writing to the persona that he set up in his mind. This person who he said, okay, I'm going to be writing to you, but really he's writing to himself and he's writing to the people of the world. And he talks about so many of the things that you're mentioning here, even just reminding us how bad we are at predicting anything in the future. And so when we go ahead into the future and we say, he said that fear and hope are bedfellows, essentially, because they're both saying, well, if this happens in the future, I'll be happy or I'll be sad. And we're so bad at predicting. But I'd love to ask something about just having these items around that remind us of certain things, because we are certainly kindred spirits. I mean, on my desk here, I have about a year and a half ago, I have these little rocks that I found and picked up on a beach over in St. Martin in the Virgin Islands when I was working on a cruise over there. And I brought them home and I never knew what I was going to do with them. But surprising to me is I put them on my desk and I put a big one in the middle and then I surrounded them. So it's kind of like a little thing in the middle and it looks like a little sun of rocks. And then there's another few little rocks that I put there that build into a little pyramid. And, I've got this strange little thing here that's just like a little vase with some flowers in it. And it was weird to me when I started doing this. I was like, is this weird that I'm putting these things on my desk? Why am I doing this? And then I started to notice that the more I got into the perhaps spiritual traditions, the more I started awakening to perhaps more of the ritualistic tradition, it started making sense to me a little bit more, because what's happening is I'm making meaning in my life. I'm surrounding myself with beautiful things, even just the art on the wall. Or I tell people, build a library. Even if you don't read the books, at least build a library so that every day you walk into a room and you think, oh, look at all of this brilliant knowledge that these brilliant thinkers thought up and put in this book for me, and it inspires you. And I wonder what's happening there when we surround ourselves with beauty, or when we have these items in our life that remind us of certain things. What do you think that says about our capacity as human beings? Like what I don't know, what's happening there that is so special, because it's strange to me.
Yeah, I think it's like, Amma, who's a hugging saint in India, she says that we're all climbing the same mountain, but we have different paths. And so, some of my friends are very Zen. They like completely uncluttered spaces, nothing on the wall, read books on Kindle because they don't like to accumulate objects. They find it really burdensome. And that works. And that works for them. But I think whatever works as a reminder, but for me, like I have a picture of Marcus Aurelius up here, and I have Thich Nhat Hanh's "This is it, this is it," this is it, this moment, this is it, this life, this is it, on the wall behind me, and a photograph. And what it reminds me, as maybe somebody triggers something and I find myself slipping into anger or depression or anything, when I look at it, and I have this postcard that says each step you make should bring you closer to the Pure Land. And so then I ask myself, is this what I'm going to do right now? Is it going to get me closer to where I want to be? So I have these reminders. I'm the kind of person who needs reminders. I travel with them in my purse, and in a hotel, I have a little shrine next to me. It's a reminder of the kind of human being I aspire to be, the kind of life I want to live, because I'm working with myself and all the stuff I carry, all my patterns, some really neurotic, right? I mean, we all have neurotic patterns. We all have ways that we've been wounded and hurt, and so I think life has so much of suffering, and we are all feeling this now, with what is going on in the world. We are bombarded and we see these images. There's no escaping it. So it's not easy being a human being. It's not easy being joyful, which is our birthright. It's not easy living with impermanence, having our loved ones die. It's not easy. I mean, in classes, you'll hear of great loss, why people come to Stoicism, why. And, sometimes I just lie down after class and I just feel this, I wish I could take that away, but I can't. And you feel the grief, you feel the suffering, but there's nothing you can do. And I think all these philosophies are giving us ways of how do we still recover joy? How do we still do our work? How do we stay compassionate without keep an open heart? In the Jennifer song, let sorrow be the doorway to an open heart. Let it be an open heart, not closed, because we can shut down, we can give in to addictive tendencies. We can sleepwalk through life, we can shut out other people's suffering. But how do we? I think part of this path of both Stoicism, the circle of concern, and the view from above, and in Buddhism, this how do we stay open to how do we listen to our own suffering and the suffering of others? How do we help others? How do we live, whether there's something after life or not? How do we live this life well? And I think life's not easy. It's not, impermanence is not easy. I mean, it's good news. Thich Nhat Hanh says you have to have impermanence, otherwise the child won't grow up. Impermanence is good news, but with impermanence comes death and loss and illness, and so we are dealing with all this, and we are human beings and we feel. And so I think what Stoicism, this therapy for the soul, what it does is it helps us to connect to this happy life, you know. That's the way I see it. I mean, for me, it's just that practical, you know, this sort of, it just helps me, you know. Marcus did it. He was a man. And Frank. I mean, I'm just stunned that she lived in a world of such horror, a world gone mad. And yet she used cognitive reframing. She would say, you know, all this difficult things is good material for my journal. She would find ways. She would find little tiny things, seeds of joy. And she had no idea, like Marcus Aurelius had no idea that his journal would live on. You know? And so it's incredible. So they voice, I mean, in Buddhism, or in, you know, we would say that maybe in the short term, goodness may not win. Because everything in me, I remember, you know, just sort of seeing evil as I read the diary of Anne Frank, and wishing it was otherwise. I mean, her last diary entry is 3 days before they were caught. But in the long scheme of things, her voice has reached millions. And so has Marcus's voice, you know. So there is a way that what we do echoes through the centuries. You know, there is a way that our physical body dies, but our good deeds, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, our actions are our only belongings. And so this leading the good life, being kind, being just, being courageous, will continue. And so we are a continuation of all that, right? We are a continuation of all the people we admire.
I have so many questions. There's so much good stuff there. I'm really glad that before I ask these questions, I just want to mention to everybody, in about 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to transition over to a Q&A period. So if you have had a question so far that you've written down or you've thought of, or if you just have one that you'd really like to ask, make sure you just go down and put your hand up in the Zoom. If you see the reactions button down the bottom, you can put your hand up and I'll just go through who has their hands up. But I'm so glad, Ranjini, that you brought up the inevitable suffering of life and in a sense the tragedy that we see so much around us, because people could be forgiven for thinking, okay, well, look at us here talking about how to become enlightened, how to have attention, how to feel true joy in life, while, I mean, you turn on the news and look, the world is burning around us. I mean, there's so much horror in the world just at the moment, and we cannot help but feel that sorrow. You mentioned that sorrow is a gateway to I'm forgetting
an open heart, a doorway to an open heart. Yeah,
that's right. And I guess one of the things that you've also mentioned is, I'll try and draw a couple of ideas together here. One of the things you also mentioned is this idea that in the short term, perhaps evil or injustice or badness will win. But it seems like in so many of these traditions, whether you look at Genesis and God said that it was good, and then it was very good, this creation. And then we look at the Stoics, and I was thinking about this the other night, and it was kind of an epiphany for me, because the Stoics believe that we are a part of a rationally ordered cosmos. And one of the things that technically means is that everything has a place. Everything has a purpose. Everything is directed towards the good of the whole. And that's a horrifying idea that I don't think that we meditate on enough, because if you truly believed in that idea, and I think that it is almost a leap of faith to believe in that, but if you truly believed in that, then everything that's happening in your life you would look at as an opportunity to participate in this rationally ordered whole that is leading towards something that might be good for you. And it's almost like a psychopathic belief, right? But at the same time, it kind of makes it makes sense. And I think that once you take that leap of faith, you see how it could be a powerful motivator for you in your life to participate to the fullest of your capacity. And I wonder, do you think it's even possible for us to make that leap, to believe that things are in the long term aimed at the good, or aimed at being a part of a well-ordered whole? As David Feidler might have said, you know, the meaning of cosmos actually is beautiful order. So I wonder, you know, what you would say about that, these traditions that teach us that there is a purpose to all of the things that happen, even the tragedy. And I know that this is a horrible time to be asking this question because of the terrors that are going on in the world, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless.
So, I mean, the idea that there's a providence, but that shapes our end. I mean, but it's a difficult question, Simon, in the sense that I feel that, why do you do these podcasts? Why do I teach Stoicism? Part of it is that if more and more people wake up, because to me it seems completely irrational that people won't reach for wisdom, that your life can be motivated solely by wanting fame or money when you know it's impermanent. But the thing is, it's always existed through time. I mean, Marcus Aurelius himself didn't, have much influence over Commodus, and all that. So I think part of the reason why we do this is, or why we write this, or why we teach this, is this hope that just as when we reach these philosophies, something in us grew, that'll happen collectively. Because I don't think it needs to happen. And that's where choice comes in. Often there are these points, these crossroads of choice, where you can go one way in history or another way. So whether we succeed or not, the point is, I remember the Dalai Lama saying, we still try. Whether even our effort, I mean, the Bodhisattva aspiration is may all sentient beings. It's an impossible aspiration. I mean, you can't reach all sentient beings, but you sort of set yourself this task, and that there will be more goodness in the world. And then these things will not happen because we have choice. Cleanthus says, lead on God and destiny to that goal, fixed for me long ago. I will follow, and even if my will is weak, I will soldier on. There is that sense of, a destiny, but there is so much of choice, even in our own life. Even in my own life, when I want to escalate a conflict, when I want to retaliate, I'm making a choice. So there is karma. Even if you don't believe in other lives, there is karma just in that one situation where I can retaliate or not retaliate, and either escalate and have a terrible day and fight, or actually have, try to listen to see where that's coming from. So we have this choice even in our personal lives, day to day. I mean, Epictetus says that even for a moment, our mindfulness cannot slip, because what will we do in that moment when we are not mindful? So I think that, there is that sense of that somehow goodness carries on, but there is this aspiration that as more and more people reach for wisdom, that just as we feel on fire, that there will be that awakening. There will be that awareness and mindfulness and kindness. But the Dalai Lama says that we have to be trained. We really have to be trained. I mean, that loving kindness, thinking about others, compassion practices. I mean, Buddhism, there's a lot of compassion practices that we need training, and we are not trained in our schools. We are not trained to think of others. We're trained to think of ourselves mostly. So it's this we're trained to be egoic. And yet the thing is that the ego is the source of suffering. More and more and more and more for me. Let me have more land, let me have, it blows our mind. Like, how can that be more important? But it's happening. It's happened before and it's still happening. I had somehow this naive belief that the world was more small with technology, and so somehow things could not happen, but they're still happening. But I think that's, we have a lot of free will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's my take.
Well, I just think that it's so vital what you're saying there, but there's two sides to what you're saying there, because on one hand you're saying we have the free will, so we do have to think about me. What am I going to do in this situation? Yes. But at the same time, in service of the greater good. So perhaps we start by assuming that we might not even know what it means to aim at the highest good. That's probably a good place to start. But you do remind me of something that I was always taught growing up. I grew up in the Mormon tradition, and one of the key fundamental elements of the Mormon theology is that God gives us free will. It's like, if you take that away, then Mormons just fall apart. It's like free will. You can make this choice. And even in Stoicism, there's this idea that we don't control much at all, right? And we have these impressions, you might say, these stories that pop up in our mind. Well, he did this and they did this because of this. And, we have these impressions that pop up, but we have the choice to pause and reflect and to say, okay, well, I'm going to assent to this or to that. And it's so often about getting us to just pulling our attention back in and saying, okay, what are you going to assent to today in this moment, right here, right now? But I just love this idea that it's not about us, it's about how we can serve humanity as a whole. But then, sorry, I'm just drawing ideas here. Even Seneca, he says, I'm going to paraphrase here. He says something along the lines of, do not believe that the person who lives for himself is not at the same time living for everybody else, right? Because there's an inner path that we follow, that if you will follow that inner journey of service to the outer world, but through your own inner actions and being very careful with those, beautiful things can come about. So Ranjini, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I really want to give you a chance before we let everybody have some questions here. And Kai Whiting has just jumped in. Kai, welcome. But if you just want to share with us how people can come and get more involved in what you're doing at the University of Toronto, because you're doing some beautiful work up there, and your journaling classes, and perhaps we'll dive into a bit of a Q&A once you've given us that.
Right. So, I teach at the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Toronto. So I teach in the creative writing program. And I also teach Stoicism in the arts and humanities. So I teach Stoicism and the Good Life, which runs in March, April every year. So we are in the midst of a class, and the Dear Diary class, which is Marcus Aurelius, Anne Frank, and Thich Nhat Hanh, where we do Buddhism, Stoicism, and writing, journaling, and that happens in November, towards the end of October, November, December. So they are online classes, and you're welcome to join. If you're interested in writing, there's meditation and writing. So my own training in meditation, and I brought that into writing. So I have classes in those areas. Other classes like mindfulness, stoicism, and writing for discipline and productivity, because I find that even, there's so much that you can learn from the Stoics about how to use your time. I mean, it's been huge for me. It's really helped me. I'm still working on it, but it's really huge working with our habits, because our habits are so deep rooted. Like I think of it, it's like a ship turning course. We do 1%, 1%. We move in the direction that we want to go to. But yes, so y'all are welcome. They can be taken as one-off courses. So we have students actually from everywhere. And they can also be taken as part of a creative writing certificate or arts and humanities or a mindfulness certificate. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So you find me on the website.
Well, Ranjini, it's been so much fun talking to you, and you have so much wisdom to share, and this has just been such a meaningful conversation. We're going to open it up to a Q&A, and I feel like an explanation is warranted very quickly because we've got a few people wandering in now. So we at the Walled Garden are very much trying to refine our process for figuring out time zones around the world. Because Kai and I were talking the other night and we were like, Google says at this time over here, it's this time over here and this time over here. And we're thinking, what's going on? And then I'm speaking to Ranjini recently and she's saying, okay, now it's changed to daylight savings time and we're all going. So welcome, Kai. Do you want to talk to our difficulty?
Is that why I'm late for an hour? Have I turned off an hour late? Oh, honestly. But it seriously said 8 o'clock my time.
Yeah, no, see that. Okay. See, that's my fault, but it's also Google's fault. So I'm going to blame Google, right? But I'm going to bring it back to my free will. I should have done deeper research. I should have taken this responsibility upon myself. But the fact that half the people were here at the start means that half of us got it right. So congratulations. This is the game of the Walled Garden, is who can get the time zone right. That's our.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm embarrassed now.
Well, no apology needed. I'm sorry that we didn't work this out. It's difficult, especially when we book a time when you're in one time zone and then daylight savings happens and now we're in another. So but nonetheless, Kai, if you want to ask any questions, please, I want you to start. If you have any questions that you wanted to ask Ranjini, and anybody else, please just put up your hand if you have a question. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll get this discussion going.
Well, Ranjini, I will always ask you one of those tough questions about what do you think a Stoic journey looks like without any aspect of the transcendence, and what, in your opinion, does one potentially, and I use it potentially, miss out on if their journey doesn't involve a transcendence or a sense of the divine? And I've just thrown you in the deep end, but I was going to ask you something along those lines. So yes, that would be my main question.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Kai, and it's come up. And I really am of the idea. I quoted Amma, the hugging saint, earlier when she says we're all climbing the same mountain and we're climbing it on different paths. So I feel that, there's no one way to climb the Stoic mountain. I really, for me, I bring in a Buddhist and perspective. I bring in, Hinduism, mystic Christianity, and Sufism, and that's my personality. But someone else might bring in something else. And so Thich Nhat Hanh says that even about mindfulness, and I see Thich Nhat Hanh as my spiritual father. Like he's, I've just learned so much from the Zen monk, the simple Zen monk. But he says that even about mindfulness, he says, don't have fixed mind. Don't be even dogmatic about mindfulness. And I've suffered so much by people actually telling me when I was growing up what I should believe in, and judging me later for, whatever, that I'm really one of those who says, trust your own wisdom. That's what the Buddha says. He says, take my words and see what works for you. So for me, there is that element, for me, it's a very important element, but it doesn't have to be for everyone. That's my take. Because I can't presume to know, my own ideas have changed. 20 years ago, I had different ideas. Now I have different ideas. So for me, that transcendence that is important. You know, it's part of my practice, but I don't think it has to be for that. Because of that, I'm a deeper practitioner or a better practitioner. That's my take.
Thank you.
And
Kai,
I actually quoted you, Kai. You know, I quoted you today. I said, because something that you said yesterday really, I mean, you gave such a brilliant visit yesterday. It just rocked. Excellent. It was so moving. But you said, you know, when talking about Amor Fati, love your fate, you said that fate is not something that happens to you, but through you. And I actually journaled. I wrote your words this morning in my journal, you know, just the idea of letting it flow, you know, all the stuff that happens, letting it flow instead of resisting suffering and resisting fate, if it's fate or whatever.
Thank you. I can't take credit for it. It was a historic idea, but, but I think bringing it to light, it's certainly not my idea, but I think it is important that people, when they hear Amor Fati, they don't just think, oh, well, you know, I'm poor, for example. Oh, I just should just tolerate that. Or I'm rich and therefore,
yes.
Oh, I'm lucky and I should just, you know, other people's, you know, if there's inequality or unjust inequality, you know, people should love their fate. No, it's through you. It's such a powerful thing. And then when negative things or what we perceive to be negative things happen to us, we're like, well, what option do I have in my, you know, in my actions and my thoughts and my attitude to change things for the better? So it's a very powerful straight concept that doesn't get enough ink. So I'm glad that you're writing it literally down in your journal. I appreciate it.
We have Nicholas Templeton, if you want to jump in and ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, I came late. Yeah, I got confused with the time zone issue. I think a few others did. So what I wanted to ask, and you may have covered this already, but Viktor Frankl has a quote along the lines of between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our choice to act. And it's all, I think a lot of it, of what we learn in sort of Stoicism and mindfulness in general is like trying to maximize that space, or like be aware so that when something does happen, you kind of have the opportunity to react in a good way. So like from a personally for you, what techniques or practices or how do you ensure that even when something really triggers you, something unjust perhaps, how do you ensure that you can increase that time?
Mm-hmm. So for me, you know, like the Stoicism has sort of, there's some things that Stoicism stresses that has been really useful, and some that Buddhism stresses more that has been really useful. And in Stoicism, you do have prosoke, mindfulness, but in Buddhism, there is a lot of emphasis on sitting, on learning to stay, and this emphasis on actually stopping, sitting. Even though you feel restlessness, you may feel anger, you may feel grief, but you learn to stay. You learn to stay with very hot emotions. You learn to stay with heavy emotions, but you develop it like a muscle. You know, Pema Chandran, a Tibetan teacher, she says, you know, it's like a dog telling the mind, stay. You know, you're telling a dog, stay, 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 but you're learning to stay. And that practice of actually coming back to your breath and, you know, taking these breath breaks. And that's in all spiritual traditions. You know, I went to Christ in the Desert Monastery near Biqui in New Mexico, and you wake up 5 times a day, you know, in the Islamic tradition. I mean, so there's this idea that find ways of going back to your breath, find ways of centering yourself. And as you practice that area between stimulus and response will get bigger and bigger as you practice going back to your presence and to yourself, slowing down. That area becomes, you know, I mean, I know that when I started practicing, like someone would say something, and before I knew it, you know, the words would come out. I would be angry. But now there's that observing, that witnessing consciousness sort of kicks in, that presence kicks in faster. So I think it's through practice. But really, this practice of of coming back to yourself, of slowing down, of connecting to your breath. It could be as simple as what Thich Nhat Hanh says, breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And it's really powerful. So you might be at a meeting with, or in the midst of a confrontation, but just feeling your feet on the floor. It's on the spot mindfulness, feeling your feet on the floor, just coming back to your breath, is a reminder. And I think that sort of helps. That helps me. And I find that whenever I am too hurried, I'm much faster in saying the wrong thing and in escalating a conflict or being unkind. I think it's really important to slow down. And I think we have to find ways through the day to slow down, to come back to our breath. Going back to what Thich Nhat Hanh says, this hurry sickness, to really come back to our breath and connect to the kind of human being we want to be, just connecting that. I wanted to mention before I forget and before the next question that March 17th is Marcus Aurelius's death anniversary. And talking about what helps me come back is sometimes, I've had a night or two here and there when I can't sleep, when my emotions are all over and I'm upset by something that's happened, and I walk into my study and I flip open the meditations and I just read a couple verses. And there it is, this voice from over 1900 years ago, and it just calms me. Wisdom is powerful. It's powerful. It calms me and it brings me back to myself. Thank you, Marcus.
And thank you, Nicholas, as well, for that question. We have Corinne Schneider. If you want to ask your question now.
Yes, so first off, thanks for doing this. I definitely got a lot out of the presentation. I'm from Guelph, Ontario, so fairly close to Toronto, so it's a nice coincidence. And this is my first time in one of these meetings. So I just had a question on, so you touched on the similarities between Buddhism and Stoicism, that one thing that's really important, I think, is that Epictetus would say that we live in accordance with nature and that we confine ourselves to the present and that we're sort of free of negative thoughts, not so much suppressing these thoughts, but minimizing them, and that we purify our judgments, we focus on what is within our control. And monks will aim to free their mind from outside disturbances to be at peace. It's the whole idea of being, which is what it would be in Taoism, and also what Marcus Aurelius would reinforce, to become sort of indifferent to externals, regardless of the corruption and the circumstances that you're born into. And that's similar to what Anne Frank was into. And one distinction between Buddhism and Stoicism that I found sort of throughout my journey is that maybe in Buddhism, it may be more recommended to isolate yourself and clear your mind, while maybe in Stoicism, as Seneca would say, what you need is not to be in a different place, but to be a different person, sort of like changing your views and altering your perceptions on reality. So it's more maybe the idea of encouraging you to go out there to endure hardships and learn to be unhindered and different to other people's opinions, ideas. And it's sort of the idea that, if other people can't damage your free will, that it can't hurt you. That's the most important. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on this sort of distinction in practice and what your views might be on it.
Yeah, so engaged Buddhism is huge. Thich Nhat Hanh is in the monastic tradition, but he was very much involved in engaged Buddhism, in trying to stop the Vietnam War. He traveled in his journal, written in the 1960s, which I do in my Dear Diary class. He met with Martin Luther King. And so there's this whole emphasis of really being that when the monastics, and so there's the lay Buddhist tradition, a lot of the Tibetan Buddhists on the lay Buddhist tradition, and then there's the monastic tradition. But even in the monastic tradition, when the monks and the nuns take their vow, they vow to transform their own suffering so that they can then help to transform the suffering of others. So it's very much engaged. It's not that you're actually in, and for some that might be the path. I mean, the Carmelite nuns, but again, they do so much, right? I mean, there's silence, but they do so much. But there is this, the monks are actually, the monastics in Plum Village are very much engaged in social issues and climate change and on podcasts and speaking and all that. Yeah. So, and I think that's the strength of that I have found, that these teachings have actually come from people who've suffered. They've, the Vietnam Wars dragged on for, for a long, long time. And Thich Nhat Hanh suffered greatly. He was exiled from his own country. And the Dalai Lama was, when China took over Tibet, and still, he went into exile and lost his homeland. And, so they have suffered through war. And there's very much an emphasis on being engaged. And I actually wanted to take this minute to, this prayer that I pulled out, Simon, at the beginning of our talk, which is, I have a Dalai Lama calendar. So I begin my day by reading a verse. And in this, he says, may I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector for those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need. So there is this, that when we work with our own mind, we are working so that we can all transform ourselves and help others. So that is the goal. And the Dalai Lama is very clear that conversion is not the point. He actually even tells people, don't become a Buddhist, don't convert. He says that you don't have to be Chinese to eat Chinese food. He says, take what you like from this philosophy, from this religion, or whatever you want to call it. But the goal is that use what works. Work with your afflictive emotions, work with your difficult emotions, and help others. So the cosmopolis, interconnection, the circle of concern, yeah.
There's such a generosity in that philosophy, right? Meeting people where they're at and saying, no matter where you're at, just take the good stuff, whatever you see. It's
whatever
yours.
You see, yeah. Learn from others, and and you can learn from everyone. And the people who've harmed you the most are sometimes your biggest teachers. I mean, he says that because they have sometimes put you on that path, and without them, where you wouldn't have had to practice patience and forgiveness and tolerance, So everything is cognitive reframing.
Like Marcus said, everything is opinion.
Yes.
Whoa. So Christine, you have a question? I'll welcome you in.
But a good question. Thank you, Corinne. Thank you. Great question. And if you're near Toronto, maybe I'll see you. And
hopefully, maybe I'll message you. And yeah, I'm interested in your practice. So
yes, please. Feel free to share my email I can put it in chat.
Sure. Christine, would you like to jump in?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Simon, for doing this. This is the first time I've been to one of these as well. Hi, Ranjini.
Hi, Christine.
Hi. I have to mention, Ranjini has another course that I'm taking called Memoirize Spiritual Practice, and it's amazing. You guys should all check it out. I've learned so much about myself, and through that, I've learned about writing. So if you're writing anything about yourself, you got to take that. So my question is, as you can hear, I have very limited time. There's children in the background. And so, Ranjini, you were saying, learn to work with your time and your habits are deep rooted. So this is something that I have been struggling with my whole life. And I actually asked Ranjini to do a mentorship, I don't know, maybe like a year ago. And it took me maybe 2 or 3 more semesters to actually submit what I said I was going to submit to her, because in my mind, it was like, I have a child. What am I supposed to do? You know, I don't have this time. So I'm asking for tips and ideas and any insights you have on how to work with what you can't change around you and make that time, like, because it's like that. I'm doing the dishes and I'm thinking, okay, I need to write something. And so I've lost that time. So
yeah.
Ideas.
Yeah, that's a big question, Christine. I struggled with, you know, things like procrastination and perfectionism and feeling overwhelmed a lot. And so I really studied and sort of researched it. I actually have a class, Mindfulness, Stoicism, and Writing for Discipline and Productivity, a 4-week class, where I really focus on time. So drawing from the Stoics and drawing from the mindfulness traditions. But actually, when you start working, as Seneca says, not lack of time, but when you learn to work with time, and you bring attention to time, time actually opens up. It's a big question, and so I can't really. There are many strategies that I teach, but. I mean, one quick thing is that any habit you want to turn, you know, James Clear says that in Atomic Habits, it's 1%. So if you have 10 minutes of writing time, use that 10 minutes of writing time, because our habits, and our habits are difficult to change. It's like a ship turning course, but our habits are what really, you know, our good habits and our bad habits. Our habits are really, without that habit, we don't finish a book, right? Without that habit, we don't do that every day. But I think small increments, I would say, you know, like even for meditation, 5 minutes. Reading the calendar of the Dalai Lama takes me 2 minutes, but immediately I'm training my brain in a certain way. I don't know if that helps. It's fast. But you've done a lot of writing, and great writing. You're a beautiful writer. So rich and luscious prose. So. And yes, the 10 minutes, even 10 minutes at a time. They say 20 minutes to go into flow state, but yeah, even 10 minutes, I would say even 5 minutes, even a 2-minute breath break. I see other hands. So thank you, Christine. Thank you. And see you on Wednesday. Look forward to reading your story.
Thanks for that, Christine. I'm gonna throw it over to Judith now. Judith, if you want to jump in with your question.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Ranjini. It's been a beautiful session. It's not a question exactly, it's more of a sort of a thought or an observation. You mentioned your picture of Ernest Hemingway's little writing table. That really resonated with me because most of my work's been done on the tradition of Jane Austen. And of course, Jane Austen's writing table is also iconic in that way. Yeah. But thinking about how we, it's very similar actually. We make those connections with people from the past, and obviously you did as well with Anne Frank. And I always think of what Marcus says in the first section of the Meditations, where he lists all the people who have helped him. And one of the things he says is his brother introduced him to the great men of the past. And the verb he uses, the Greek is gnonai, which is the same verb as using for get to know someone who's living, get to know a living friend. So it's important to get to know these friends who are long dead, I guess. And for those of us who work with these ancient traditions, that's so important. But these tangible things like a statue or a picture or a text are connections with those long dead friends. Seneca talks about it as well. You know, you might as well spend time with your friends from long past. And I guess that's really just an observation I would make, that getting to know these long dead people is is as important, I guess, as our living connections.
Mm-hmm. That's beautifully said, Judith. And it's so true, right? I mean, Kai sort of touched on that yesterday in class when someone, who's going through loss, that we really continue them. Thich Nhat Hanh says that no birth, no death, only continuation. No birth, no death, only continuation. So this idea of, that we actually continue, that their voice continues. I find that incredible how, Paul Kalanithi says that, and when breath becomes air, he says words have a longevity that we do not. And there is that sense that when I read his memoir, and he had passed on with cancer, he was a neurosurgeon, I knew his heart and mind. And the same with Anne, right? I mean, you get to know her like a friend, like a close friend. And Marcus, maybe even more than his legion knew him, because we actually are, we are sharing this very private moment, where he's vulnerable and open. So we become the continuation. And I think that's then becomes a really powerful way of saying, whose continuation do I want to be? And so we ask our question then, like, what would Marcus do, or what would someone do? In Fragrant Palm Leaves, he talks about losing his mother. And he says that, when he actually walked outside, he says, I noticed my mother was still with me. She was the moonlight caressing me, very tender, very sweet. Each time my feet touched the earth, I knew my mother was there with me. I knew this body was not mine alone, but a living continuation of my mother and my father and my grandparents and great-grandparents, of all my ancestors. These feet that I saw as my feet were actually our feet. Together, my mother and I were leaving footprints in the damp soil. From that moment on, the idea that I'd lost my mother no longer existed. All I had to do was look at the palm of my hand, feel the breeze on my face or the earth under my feet, to remember that my mother is always with me, available at me. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh, who was so influential in my life, passed on in January. But in my breathing, in my breath, in my practice, in my effort to be compassionate and to be mindful, he is there. And that's how we continue. When I look at my hands, I see my father, and so it's a very powerful idea. And it's a powerful idea to work with impermanence and loss, that we are the continuation. We are Marcus's continuation. Commodus didn't do really well, his biological son.
Ranjini, I just want to thank you so much for spending the time answering these questions and for being here with us. Is there anything that you'd like to share just quickly before I give final remarks? And I mean, we're dead on time here. This is perfect timing. Yeah. But is there anything that you wanted to mention?
Well, thank you so much, Simon and Kai and Sharon, for inviting me. This has been wonderful, and it's just it's been such a great experience. I don't know. I don't have any. I think I would just say practice, practice. In writing, we say practice, practice, practice. Whatever you practice at, you'll get better. You practice anger, you get better at anger. You practice impatience, you'll be better at impatience. You practice wisdom, you will get better. It just has to be. And for me, it's that patience, patience with my writing projects, patience with myself, as I work with my, you can sometimes be really harsh with yourself, and to bring that self-love and maitri and loving kindness, and to know that you don't walk alone. And I think, the things that you do now are really important, because sometimes the culture around us can be, people are walking to a different drumbeat, and it's like, how come you don't realize this? But we don't need to be judgmental. And, and that was one of the mistakes that I did when I started off. I became more isolated because I became more judgmental and arrogant. And that is what Trungpa Rinpoche calls spiritual materialism, where we become egoic. Oh, I'm so good. I'm practicing, but the people around me are not. They're buying this car and buying, but I'm doing this. And it's subtle, but it takes away everything. Everything we've practiced and learned, we lose through arrogance. And so humility, and seeing interconnection, and not being judgmental, but just seeing that we can learn from everyone is really important, and showing that same kindness to ourselves. So we're all on this journey together, and I love these things because I feel less alone on the path. We just feel we have a community in the past, in the present, and in the future who are walking this. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ranjini. It's been a pleasure. And I just want to mention to everybody before we end here. So, part of the walled garden, if I can use a cheesy segue, is actually recognizing that we need to find our group of people around the world who are interested in walking that path together. And so, that's what we're trying to do here, is to bring in really fascinating, beautiful guests like Ranjini and many more. I'm going to put a link in the comments here. One of the links is to our events page. And if you want to go there on thewalledgarden.com/events, we've got some more coming up. For example, next month, we're going to be speaking with Mark Vernon, who recently wrote a book about the spiritual path in Dante's Inferno, Divine Comedy. So that's going to be a beautiful session. We've also got, who have we got here? We've got Karen Duffy, the actress, talking about her new book. We've got a whole bunch of meetups coming up, and we'd love to see you there. And another way that you can kind of get involved in the community, even if you don't want to become a member and support us financially, you can just go and join us in our Discord forum. And that's just a great place for us all to chat, and you get updates about various events coming up. And so I've just put a link in the I always think the show notes, because I'm a podcaster, in the comment section there.
And the Facebook page.
And the Facebook page too. There's a whole bunch. If you look up, the Walled Garden community on Facebook, you can find our group there and all sorts of things. But just get involved. We'd love to see you around. We're trying to build relationships with people around the world. And although we all come at this from a Stoic perspective, because Kai is a Stoic and I've been practicing this for a while, and Sharon as well, the core values are truth, wisdom, virtue, the divine. That's it. So if you're interested in following that path, then we'd love to see you more often. So with all of that said, again, thank you, Ranjini. This has been so beautiful. Sorry, everybody, about the time mess up, but we'll figure it out. We're getting better on our path. And I guess we'll see you at the next meetup.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
And beautiful questions. See you later.
Bye-bye. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Be well.
Bye.
Bye.